All right. Good morning, Doug. Today, I would like to talk about the Civil War, or the war between the states, or the War of Northern Aggression, um, but not specifically delving into the details of that as much, but just trying to see how we can apply some of the lessons, some of the things we know about that to current times. And specifically, we've discussed in past episodes the idea that the war between the states was fundamentally driven by economics. Yes, there were simmering, cultural differences between the parts of the country. There was probably some animosity and resentment between different groups, but at the end of the day, it seemed like economics, were the catalyst for what actually led it to war. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct. And of course, when a lot of people that write things about the late unpleasantness, which is another name for it, like Ta-Nehisi Coates. Uh, where did he get that name, incidentally? I don't want to go off on a tangent, but
No idea.
I assume it's an assumed name on his part to show his racial solidarity with the brothers in Africa or something. I don't know. But The Atlantic had a Civil War special a while back, and I read part of it. And Ta-Nehisi and the other writers for it went to great pains to point out that, yes, there are people that say that the Civil War was about economics, but it really wasn't. It was really about race. And it's a total lie, like almost everything that you read about race today, since they're making race into the most important thing in the world. And it should be about the least important thing in the world, or pretty unimportant anyway.
Yeah.
So,
So
anyway, yeah. So, how important were economics? I think they were absolutely critical. In fact, I'll go so far as to say, my father didn't communicate very much with me. He was actually a loquacious guy, but as far as I was concerned, he was a man of few words. But I remember asking him a question, cosmic question about the way the world works. And his answer was, it's all a matter of economics. That was his whole answer to my complex question as a sophomore or junior in high school. And then I remember some months later, I asked him another question. And he said, it's all a matter of psychology. And of course, saying just a few things, you think about these few words, and actually, most of life is either about economics or psychology.
right, and it seems.
Actually,
I mean, I remember you telling me the story, maybe a decade ago, and I have thought about it many, many times since then. And I think that, and I keep trying to find the where that's not the case, and I can't find a counter example, essentially, where those aren't the fundamental influences. And you look at the war between the states, the psychological state was there, at least the seeded before, at least to some degree, but ultimately the economics situation is the thing that proved to be that lit the fuse, I guess. And what I wonder is, if that was true then we've talked about the idea that the U.S. may break apart now, or in sometime in the near future. Um, you'd have to assume that economics would be a key driver of that today as well. And I just wonder what that might look like. Just trying to think through the scenarios of where that catalyst might emerge, and whether or not it's even possible today in the same way it was then.
yeah, it's a good question because the country's much more mobile today than it was then. In other words, in those days, if you were born in a given state, chances were overwhelming. You would live and you would die in that state. That's not the way it is today. You can be born in New Hampshire and you wind up in Arizona or God knows where, after going through a half a dozen other states along the way. And of course, this the well-known exodus from places like New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts and California to Florida and Arizona and Idaho, that's and the question is, if the country breaks up, are all these refugees from states that are becoming shitholes, Are they going to bring their values that made those places terrible with them to places that are nice? Or are they going to reform as they move into the new culture of their adopted state? I don't know.
No.
And
Don't-
and maybe we shouldn't even be looking at this on a state by state basis because uh, Portland is very different from Eastern Oregon, as is Seattle from Eastern Washington, as is LA and San Fran, or the coast from the interior of California. They're different worlds.
Exactly. Yep, they are. They are. But when you think about, just let me bring up an example about the economic piece of this that I'm just trying to pose a potential catalyst, and that is that the idea that now today so much funding comes from the federal government to the states, issued in grants, issued in um, to individuals for Social Security or Medicare or whatever. But there's so much money that comes for highways comes from the feds to the states. And my thought was that you know, um, you know, well, there was talk during Trump's presidency about California, for instance. They said they were a net loser in the financing from the federal government. That they paid more to the federal government than the state received, back. And so there was talk about maybe we'll secede. And this was the Democrats saying this to when Trump was president. Maybe we should secede, and because we don't even get the financial benefits of it. So this idea of we actually give more than we take, that kind of concept certainly could be part of the seed of it. But you see things like what's going on in Texas now, where on the border, the, the Texas governor believes that the feds have not done a good job in managing the border, like we're being overwhelmed. And so he allocated, Governor Abbott allocated some COVID relief money that came from the feds to border protection and asked other states for help. And a number of states have joined the effort. I mean, if places from Iowa to Florida to Idaho to Kansas, states like that have all sent some police officers or law enforcement there to help. And I just wonder if like seeds of a dispute can kind of be formed in that way, where the federal government says no, that's a total misallocation of funds, like you aren't supposed to be using it for border protection, and they get into a fight about that, and maybe Texas decides, well, we'll withhold our tax receipts next quarter.
Very logical, and it would seem very possible. And perhaps uh, in the same breath, we could talk about what do you call these states that are safety states for
Yeah.
migrants?
Oh yeah, the sanctuary cities, sanctuary
Sanctuary
states.
states. And of course, it turns out that about 2/3 of the counties in the US are so-called sanctuary counties for Second Amendment purposes. Have you heard that?
I didn't know it was that high. No, that was amazing.
Well, that's the number that I've seen. And what it means is that if federal law enforcement comes in to prosecute a federal gun crime, local law enforcement will not assist them. Or, as a matter of fact, there's been talk about local law enforcement will arrest them for violating local laws
Hmm.
if the sheriff is of a mind to. And it's an idea that I like very much. So this could spin out of control. There's so many things that could spin out of control. In fact, right now, we're kind of like in a happy time where everybody's still got the remnants of their stimmy checks, and the stock market's up, and pension payments are still being made, and people are taking their masks off and they feel liberated and free, and it's the summertime. Everybody loves the summertime. So what's going to happen in, let's say, a couple of months as retail inflation goes way up, and I think it will, and the stimmy checks are gone, and maybe, I hope it doesn't, because, but I think it will. Stock market melts down and people get unhappy. And the race baiters come out because that was a lot of fun the last time they did. So then what happens? Okay, at this point, a lot of localities might decide, wait a minute, we're sending a lot more money into the feds than they're sending back to us, and all we get is aggravation.
Mhm.
So I'm still of the opinion that a breakup of the US is possible, if not an actual civil war,
Mm.
a real civil war, not just a, but maybe it'll just be a bunch of secession movements. But how would that work? I mean, you
Well,
know,
it's difficult
it
because
yeah,
go ahead. I was just gonna say it's difficult because let me show you this this thing that I found. Share my screen with you for just a second. Let's see. Okay, so this is a, I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but this is a
yeah,
list.
okay.
Now this is using data from 2018, I believe, just because that just takes a long time to get the data updated. But this shows the states that are most dependent on federal funding. And and they break it down. I like how they break it down because they break it down on based upon the residence dependency, like whether it be for Social Security, federal jobs, Medicare, or whatever, right? But the individual residence dependency ratio ranked 1 to 50, and also the state government's dependency. And the thing is that it's not it's kind of all over the map and sort of unexpected to me, in many ways. Like the number one most dependent state in the country is happens to be New Mexico. The individuals are deeply dependent upon the federal government. Apparently, my guess is welfare related in some way.
I think
uh,
that I think it's got to be New Mexico because there are more Indian reservations, I think, in New Mexico than any other place. And of course, the Indians have been kept in a state of dependency by the federal government for 100, 150 years now.
that makes sense. That makes sense. But so what you find though is that a lot of so the states that are white here, the lighter ones are the ones with the lowest dependency, and then as the darker greenish blue that they get, the more dependent they actually are. And the thing is that it's not like the red states are in general less dependent on the federal government than the blue states are. In fact, I'd say it's the opposite. So it's I just think the
You're right. There's no correlation at all. Look at Illinois,
right.
surprisingly non-dependent. Huh,
Right, exactly.
interesting.
Yeah, California is, not as nearly as dependent as, I mean, again, you look at New Mexico, you look at some of these red states. So, like Tennessee is ranked number 14th in terms of dependency. We were just talking about Tennessee earlier. People think that's a great place to be. The state government in Tennessee is ranked 9 for dependency on the federal government. Now, that almost guarantees that whatever rules the feds decide should be deployed, the state will deploy. I mean, it almost guarantees it. I guess even these, whether it goes to local police departments or sheriff's departments, I mean, all the federal funding that they get individually, the grants that they get to get their Bearcats and their assault weapons and shit like that, it's all federal government driven. And I just think that's how they buy this cooperation, because these guys can't ever imagine shrinking their budgets, and their budgets are so padded with now federal dollars. And this is from 2018. I mean, who knows what it really looks like now after all this, money that's been pushed out to the states because of, COVID relief stuff. So,
Well, yeah, and perhaps breaking it down by states is deceiving, because if you look at these states, we've talked about California, Washington, and Oregon really being divided cities to countryside, but the same is true of Illinois. You got Chicago is one thing, and the rest of Illinois is all soybeans and corn and cattle.
mm,
So they're two different states. I mean, Illinois should no longer be one state. Chicago should be separate from the rest of the state. It's not representative of it at all.
not at all.
Same is true, same is true of Indiana. I mean, you're talking about Gary and the surrounding suburbs in northern Indiana, very different from southern Indiana again.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, you're right. So, what would be interesting, and I'll look and see if I can find something on a county basis within these states to get a better understanding of it. But I think that the idea of any sort of breakup of the U.S., it will not likely be on a state by state basis, simply because of all these factors that we're talking about. And although, even though you do see these weird state coalitions, which I do find kind of interesting, whether that be deploying National Guard troops, you see these several states working together, or you see, like, California. There was this thing where California yesterday announced that they won't allow any of their state officials for official visits. Essentially, they can't go to certain states in the country. And I think there's a total of 17 blacklisted states now by California government because of their stance on LGBTQ issues.
Hmm.
So they will not allow.
Which should be absolutely none of the government's business to start with. I mean, how is somebody's sexual orientation, how does that have anything to do with the legitimate function of government? Pro, con, doesn't make any difference. I mean, this is something for people to, determine between themselves. And
Exactly.
and even though, race hatred has been pumped up into being a big deal these days. I mean, I remember when I was a kid during the 50s that, you know, blacks could not go into some restaurants. It was segregated, or if they could, they had to sit in certain stools and the back of the bus thing, all that's all true. Um, because I lived in Maryland and Virginia in those days, and I could actually see this. But the fact of the matter is, the problem with, look, if somebody owns a restaurant and they're a racist and they want to keep white people out, well, fine. That's wonderful, I think, because it identifies the psychology of the person that owns the restaurant. And you can determine whether you want to do business with them or not. If they want to keep white people out, maybe black people out, maybe Chinese people, doesn't matter. I like to know who I'm dealing with, as opposed to somebody who's resentful and is being forced to do something against his will. So all these laws that the government makes they're not solving the problem, they're counterproductive at best.
Yeah, I think that seems clear. And I mean, there was there's this famous example, went to the Supreme Court, about a baker, a cake maker in Colorado who, didn't this gay couple wanted him to make a cake for their wedding, and they knew he was a very, religious evangelical conservative, and Christian conservative. He didn't want to write. He was like, "I'll make you the cake, but I just don't want to write what you want me to write on it." But he wasn't rude about it. But they sued him, and he went all the way to the Supreme Court, and he lost. And they said, "No, you have to serve them just like anyone else." And then there was another one recently where they were basically talking about trans stuff, and again the cake maker lost. And it just shows that you don't really own your business. You don't really. The government's very, very involved in all of these
You
decisions.
know, no, you don't own anything because it's actually involuntary servitude where the state is forcing you to do something. And of course, these LGBT, PQRST people look, they're asking for trouble. They're looking for trouble. In other words, if they want a cake, fine, go to somebody who wants to make your cake and instead of trying to make a political issue of it and create all kinds of antagonism by forcing somebody, you know, I hate people that go out looking for trouble, asking for trouble.
Right. And that is
They,
definitely what's
they really ought to get it. If they want trouble, they should get it. But I have no problem personally with gay people being married. And insofar as being married offers you certain legal benefits or tax benefits, that's fine. I think they ought to take it. I have no
course.
problem with that. But I have a big problem with them, being in your face and forcing other people to do things. It makes things worse, not better.
Exactly. Yeah, it makes things way worse. But so I think the big question I have is, so we see these state coalitions forming, whether they be around, where they or states of California doesn't deem are progressive enough in their declarations or whatever, and we see, or around Texas and Arizona and the border patrol there. So you see these sort of state coalitions forming. I just wonder, is there do you think that there's a what would be the economic trigger point? I gave an example of maybe it was one, around the border funding, but that doesn't seem like that's enough to really cause, you know, a flashpoint really. And I just wondered what you think, like where might that come from? If it has to do with economics ultimately.
Well,
What-
if the flashpoint is ignited, I think it's going to be during generally bad economic times when businesses are failing again, people are losing their jobs again. Now, if they have to, people have to pay for things they're not getting. That's when it'll happen. So I think it's likely to happen. But it'll happen when the economy goes bad, and I think it's going to be within the next year. That's my guess.
And and I guess I wonder if you'd see all this probably before you'd see it on a state versus federal level. You'd probably see it on a county versus state level, I would imagine first, because I would suspect. I don't know.
It's a step in the right direction. I mean, people are saying you can't break up the U.S. Well, I'm of the opinion that the world and North America would be a better place to live in. I mean, this is conjecture on my part. Uh, that if the South had been allowed to depart peaceably, I think we'd all be much better off. And it's likely that there would be several nations in North America uh, at that point. It would have made it much harder for the US to engage in imperial ventures everywhere from, well, World War One, which we had no business in, to Vietnam, which we had no business in, if there were things were broken up. And you'd have a lot more choice if things are getting very on free. You could move to the friendly little country next door. And I have no reason to believe it wouldn't be friendly. Of course, humans being the chimpanzees that they are, anything can happen, especially since the kind of people that go into government, uh, go in for antagonism like wars too.
Yeah,
Look,
but
the whole problem is political. I don't believe in political entities to start with. I mean, let's get right to the root of this issue. Uh, you cannot and should not put people of differing worldviews, languages, religions, whatever it is, you can't fit them into a political entity where that political entity is going to extract money from all of them, and the people that get in control of the reins of power get to dominate over everybody else. I mean, Africa is a perfect example of this. Every country in Africa is a contest between the tribes to who takes over the national government and then clamps down on the enemy tribes. That's the way it works. Once somebody gets in office, it's all his buddies, generally tribal mates, that take it out on all the other tribes that they've got resentments against. Hatfields and McCoys made it into a national type of thing. So, well, for that matter, the Hatfields and McCoys, if there's whatever county that was in West Virginia, why should they be in the same county? Frankly, this is why Neil Stephenson was so correct in Diamond Age, where he laid out the way it'll probably actually evolve into files, where you find your countrymen are everywhere in the world. They're people that share values that are important to you, whatever those values may be. It could be 1,000 different things. But this whole idea of political organization based on geographic lines well, it hasn't worked.
hasn't worked. That seems clear. All right. So I guess just to wrap up, the big thing would be my contention, and just want to see, validate that or not, is that it'll probably be an economic issue. Will end up being the flashpoint more than anything else. It'll be an economic issue because it seems like that does when you can find something like what was happening within, the war between the states during that period, it was a very easy way to bring everyone in the South together because they could describe all of them, even though they would identify as a Tennessean, or they identify as whatever, a Texan or whatever. They wouldn't, they couldn't, for them to unite, essentially, they had to have a common enemy that was going to hurt them all, the same way. And economics is a way that can cause universal harm, if you're damaging it. So anyway, it seems to me that you have to have that economic component somewhere, somehow, before you'll see any real breakup.
It does, and then it helps, of course, as with the North invading the South. If if an aggressor is sending armed soldiers in to loot and burn and overthrow and so forth, I mean, yeah, you definitely want to fight back unless you're a complete whip dog, quite frankly. That's true. But economics is so important, but it's a matter of psychology too. You piss people off enough, and it stimulates whatever psychological aberrations are bouncing around in their head, and they might come back at you and do irrational things even
Right.
in response.
But it's harder to, I think, unite people on the psychological piece than it is on the economic piece. You know what I mean? I think you could have individuals probably that would react, and um, anyway, maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, that's what propaganda and or the mass media is for, after all.
Good point. It's a good point. Okay, well, I'm going to look into see if I can find more details on county dependency, because I think if you look at that, it'll, if the less dependent they are on the federal government for their existence, for their for their rice bowl, their current rice bowl, the more likely they are to put up resistance to the demands of the federal government when it comes down to it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting if it's possible to break the numbers out that way, but it would be fascinating.
I'll look and see if I can find it. Okay.
Because yeah, listen, birds of a feather flock together. That's just the way it works.
No doubt. Okay. We'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much, Doug. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you later this week.